Welcome to the Physician's Guide to Doctoring, a practical guide for practicing physicians. Dr. Bradley Block interviews experts in and out of medicine to find out everything we should have been learning while we were memorizing Krebs cycle. The ideas expressed on this podcast are those of the interviewer and interviewee and do not represent those of their respective employers. And now, here's Dr. Bradley Block.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Thermal Custom Packaging. TCP has many different products to help with medical transportation, including their totes and phase change materials, or PCMs. TCP developed a portable blood bank using these phase change materials to maintain the precise temperatures required to store and transport blood. This portable unit allows blood to remain with the patient in the critical hours following surgery, which is especially important with younger, smaller patients. Using TCP's insulated totes and their custom PCMs, they're able to transport blood specimens, biological pharmaceuticals, tissues, organs, vaccines, including the COVID vaccine, as well as allografts, refrigerated, frozen, and ultra-cold as needed. These products are even being used to ensure the safe travels of the COVID vaccines to rural areas. They also have other products such as MedShield and IceBuddy available for retail use, which you can learn more about on their website, which is thermalcustompackaging.com. Visit them with the link in the description for more information and follow them on Instagram at thermalcpackaging. Dr. Aaron Fritts, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Brad. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to us talking today.
So before we started, you said, you asked, are we having drinks while we're recording this? And so what was that you just had in your hand?
This is my old fashioned that I make for Gopi and I a couple nights a week whenever we're in the mood. And you notice I have the square cubes of ice, and I've got the orange rind and a nice little cherry. I made this with Michter's rye. It's nice and smooth. So yeah, it's kind of the thing. It's the drink that Gopi and I drink together. She's not a beer drinker, so it's like the one thing we have in common is we like rye whiskey.
It's the one thing. And your children, and you're both physicians, and you're both on podcast. I think there's more. I think there's more to that relationship. And Gopi is actually going to be on the show in a couple of weeks. So we're going to be talking about all things pediatric otolaryngology. So I'm looking forward to that.
Sounds like earwax too.
It's a lot of my day, and I'm sure a lot of her day. So just a plug for something that I have no affiliation with, but I'm going to reach for my drink. Blue Point Winter Warmer.
Oh, okay.
Blue Point is a Long Island beer. I try to be local.
Yeah.
Blue Point's probably our biggest brewery. The second, which is Great South Bay, owned by an anesthesiologist, started by an anesthesiologist. So I want to get him on the show at some point.
Yeah, that'd be amazing.
It's a spiced
I've never had it.
It's delicious. Okay. Yeah, Blue Point. Their most widely distributed one is Blue Point Toasted Lager.
Does it get outside of New York?
Probably. That one probably does. But I think they changed the recipe, and it's not as good as it once was. It's not as toasty.
Yeah, we're gonna be spending some time in San Diego. I love going to areas where there's a lot of microbrews and just checking out the local stuff. Dallas, I'll be honest, Texas beer's not that great. We don't have to get off on a tangent on beers, but I mean, fine. Northeast and Southwest, like in, specifically San Diego, there's no place like it for microbrews,
Yeah. Long Island, Brooklyn, Queens, tons of microbrews.
Tons of them.
And they're so good. They're so good. Okay. So onto the podcast, very meta, podcasting about podcasting. So you've actually inspired me to make some changes to my podcast, which is why you can now find me on YouTube. So people can actually see what we look like. Now, perfect. I don't understand why someone would want to watch an interview, but they're out there and they do. So you got to go where the audience is.
Yeah. Can we talk about that for a minute? About video versus audio? Because this is something that I've been kind of, you want me to give a little intro about Backtable just for anybody that doesn't know?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So I want to talk about audio versus video, but I'm Aaron Fritts. I'm a interventional radiologist in Dallas, Texas. And about 2017, me and a few guys started the Backtable podcast. It was based off of an app that we had where docs could kind of exchange ideas around devices. I wanted to capture information. I wanted to capture people's opinions on devices and use that as like sort of a learning tool for helping docs decide, what they want to use for any given procedure. And IR, much like ENT, is very device heavy. A lot of disposable devices. And, we started the podcast as content marketing to help bring people to the app. And it's actually what the podcast is what took off. The app kind of died and we just let it die, and it was expensive to maintain. So we let that go. But the podcast is what we kind of became known for as Backtable. And I found passion in for podcasting. And we kind of continued to build the team out. And now we have Backtable Vascular and Interventional. We have Backtable ENT, Backtable Urology, and a new show called Backtable Innovation, which is all about medtech innovation. So,
and we just had Eric Gantworker a couple weeks ago from MedTech Innovation.
You had him on the show?
Yeah.
Awesome.
I mean,
yeah.
As of recording now, it hasn't been published yet, but for the listeners, yes, you heard him a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, no, Eric's a great guy. Very big into med ed, big into the innovation space, and has got a great network. And so we've really enjoyed having him on as a host for innovation. I hope he plugged it Backtable during his recording.
Oh yeah.
So anyway, that's me in terms of why we started Backtable. I love podcasting. I love the storytelling. I love this sort of more casual conversational style of learning versus, there's a place for lectures for sure. There's a place for other forms of education, but I think the technology exists now where we can do these remote recordings, have pretty high quality audio, and people can listen on the go, on demand. That's what I really enjoy about it. And it's my way of contributing back to medicine. I always tell people, like, I'm not a researcher. I'm not an engineer minded person. I'm not going to invent something, but this is my way of contributing to medicine. So that's where I've really found it to be satisfying.
It's very selfless. My reason for podcasting is for me. It's all about me. I get to answer the questions that I want answered. And as it turns out, other people have similar questions. So then I put it out there for other people to consume, but I wouldn't be able to get the audience with the people that I get without the platform.
Well, think about it, Brad, like how we wouldn't have met without podcasting. I wouldn't have met so many amazing people if podcasting didn't exist. And that's really like one of the key things about podcasting is it's a great networking tool. Whether you want people to listen to your podcast or not, just having these conversations, it's a bond that forms, right? And I think you and I have talked about this before. It's just, it's just you form this bond that kind of like, if I run into you, or if I'm in the Northeast, we're going to go to that brewery, right? You're going to take me there. And that never would have happened if it wasn't for podcasting,
And it's intimate in that the listener has invited us into their ears, and they're like, you know what? These people have something that's worth my time to listen to, and they're either putting it on in the car or they're putting it on their earbuds, and it's just us and them. And so I think the intimacy of it is really cool, and that's also where, to your point, that's where the learning happens, right? Because it's things that you want to listen to, that you're interested in. And so then you're going to be more attentive rather than, maybe zoning out.
Right. And it pulls those anecdotes and those stories out. We're not going to I find podcasts that are very just, a review of the literature. It's not podcasting is not a good format for that. A lecture is, but a podcast is not a good format for, let's talk about the science behind this. To a certain degree, I just think the storytelling aspect of it is where it really shines. And so that's how we like to use it. And so I did want to talk about audio versus video. So audio to me is like, I listen to podcasts only. I don't watch them. I have a hard time sitting down. Like, we spend a lot of time during the day on the screen, right? I'm a radiologist. Even when I'm doing procedures as an interventional radiologist, I'm staring at a screen most of the day. And at the end of the day, if I want to learn something, I don't want to sit down in front of the computer. I want to walk around. I want to go to the gym. I want to listen to it on my commute. And so we kind of made a decision. We do have stuff on video on YouTube as supplemental, but it's not like our primary podcast. It's not like Joe Rogan podcast, right? Like I think a lot of his listeners are like video podcast listeners. And I just feel like it's very labor and time intensive. And so for Backtable, we kind of made a decision, like, let's just focus on the best possible audio quality. And then if we get decent video, that's just a plus, but it's not something we're shooting for every time. So I want to hear your take on it.
So a while ago, I had, and I apologize because I know this is the podcast, the founder of GrepMed. And he is a programmer turned internal medicine physician. GrepMed is a search engine for medical information. So
kind of like up to date, or
well, it's more like graphs and pictures and formulas and things that you can use to study from
presentations.
Exactly.
Okay.
Or if you didn't remember something like, the mechanism of action of cephalosporins, like that's the type of thing that you could look up and find a graph. So it's like this just repository of medical information like that. And what he says is he listens to YouTube. So what I realized is there's an audience out there that listens to YouTube. Like, that's where they find their audio. They might not be watching you. Maybe they'll pop their head up in a little bit and watch, but mostly they're just using it for audio content. And so I would disagree with you that, like, you gotta go where the audience is, and there's an audience there, and they're missing out on your content because you're not there. And so what you could do is just record audio and video and then just throw it up on a YouTube channel. You're not doing, it's not labor intensive. It doesn't need to be labor intensive. Yes, it'll be labor intensive if you want to make it pop and cool and amazing. And also the other problem is the editing of the audio, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can't edit out the ums.
No, it's got to be raw. If you're going to throw it on, if you're going to do that, you got to just throw it on there raw. And maybe that's the best way for us to do it. It's not part of our workflow. And yet. And we do throw every single episode on YouTube. It's just like with a thumbnail. And it's not near the engagement that we get on iTunes, Spotify, everywhere else. And so we do count those numbers. We look at what topics are hot on YouTube. And we do have, I don't know, 800 followers or something on YouTube, some not that great amount, but it's, so we do put some effort into it. I haven't been sold on whether YouTube is up there enough where we want to really put the extra effort into video. So, I mean,
I think it's another place for people to find you. So as of recording now, not yet.
Okay.
So,
well, but you're,
No, but I'm working with a company who specialize in getting your voice heard. In fact, the name of the company is Through the Noise, right? Okay. And so I interviewed a bunch of different places because I was looking for someone to help me market my podcast on social media. And one place that I interviewed, they said, you know what? Yeah, we just put stuff up on Instagram and our hits aren't what they used to be. It's dropping down. I was like, you're really not selling yourself here. He's like, yeah, I know. I know. So what they said was that, and they'll edit this out if it's proprietary information because they're listening to it and editing it. Go ahead, guys. But what they said was the eyeballs are all on TikTok and is these quick bursts of video that are garnering a lot of the attention. And the thing about YouTube Shorts and TikTok and even Instagram is that you'll finish watching a video and then there'll be recommended videos afterwards.
Yeah.
You don't have that with podcasts. You finish your episode and the podcast player just stops or maybe goes on to the next episode on that podcast, but it doesn't recommend content to you. And so how do you get people to find you? How do you get through the noise? Because what does everybody do? They make an audiogram, they put it on LinkedIn, they put it on Twitter, they put it on Instagram, and then they hope that people like it and share it. And maybe that turns into a couple more listeners. So it's just another way of getting, and hence the name of the company, through the noise.
Yeah. There is a lot of noise out there. And I think about that every time I'm scrolling on Instagram. I'm like, I'm scrolling past all this stuff that somebody found important enough to post, and I just don't have the time or energy or interest to like engage with it. And so you're right, an audiogram, not that engaging, right? I mean, maybe for exposure wise, maybe you're going to capture a new listener that way, and they'll click on it and they'll check you out. But how many people are actually sitting there and listening to the full 2 minutes of that audiogram and really getting something out of it? I don't know.
Well, the question is, do they use that to then download the podcast? Because I don't think that you really want it to be something attention grabbing, not necessarily something educational.
Yeah.
Right. You want it so that they then go down the rabbit hole and find the podcast. That's what you want. So for all the people that look at it, maybe a couple then become listeners, but then listeners stay. Listeners download the back catalog, and they continue listening.
Right. Do you survey your audience about like how they find your podcast and that sort of thing?
Yeah. A couple of times. And I've gotten no responses.
I tell you what,
like
man,
I'll post on Twitter, what do you want to hear? Guys, what do you want to hear? I'll post on Facebook, what do you guys want to hear? And
crickets. Well,
so
that's
reach out. Listeners, reach out. Brad at Physician's Guide to Doctoring.
I know you want that feedback.
Yeah.
And you're almost desperate for that feedback because otherwise you're just putting stuff out there. You don't know if people like it or not. And
I did get one suggestion. And I interviewed that person.
Yeah.
Worked out.
Yeah.
It was great.
So it worked out.
Good interview. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the challenge we have. Is like, how do you survey? How do you get that feedback from your audience so you're on the right path or discover new things to talk about? Otherwise, we're just kind of making it up as we go along. I mentioned podcast movement, when I was talking to you before, which I went for the first time in August. It's an amazing conference for any podcasters out there. I mean, podcasting is going to dominate this conversation. So apologies for anybody expecting anything else, but podcast movement I can't recommend it enough. Like, I am so excited to go next week. It's in LA, and it's because it's full of all this kind of information. People get up there and they tell you what's the trends, how many people are listening to you on YouTube versus Apple versus Spotify. And they'll give you all that data over the last, 5 years of like where the trends are going. And they'll also give you this, information about like breaking through the noise, how to get on TikTok, how to get people's attention and get them to listen to your podcast. And so, and it's the industry is constantly changing. And you go to this conference and you realize how big the podcast industry is. And you realize how many small podcasters there are out there. Most people, the vast majority, get under 100 plays per episode, and it's not till you break through, like you get to 200 plus, and then you're like in the kind of like top 50%. I didn't know any of that stuff. You don't, you're not aware. And so anyway, my last plug for podcast movement, if anybody wants to, in next year, it's in this next August, it's in Dallas, Brad. So I highly suggest you go, and would love to have you down here. What's that?
Can I stay with you?
Yeah, I got an extra bedroom. Yeah.
But no, I got an Airbnb. I'll get it.
But I think,
can expense it.
Yeah, you can expense it under Physician's Guide for sure.
That's right.
Yeah. But, I just, and we're giving a talk about niche podcasting this next week at the conference, and it's going to be all about just like what we're talking about is like, how do you build a team? What's important? What are the key things, and what's important when you're first starting out to like when you're kind of mid-size and as you grow, and what are the essentials? What, you're talking about paying for a service. Like, yeah, that's very, if you want to build your audience and have them teach you how to break through the noise and get to more people, it's essential. You have to spend money on that sort of thing. I think.
Well, so that's one thing that you were the inspiration for me reaching out to a service, because you and not doing it in-house, because you did it in-house and I have no idea how to do something like that. So I was hoping to get you on the show before I did that so I could learn how to build the team and not have to outsource, but too late. I'm going to be working with them for at least the next year. So, but let's get into it. So give me the Cliff's Notes version of your talk at Podcast Movement. Like when you're first starting out, who would be the first person, say, you decide to outsource to? Because again, this is a physician audience, same as yours. We're
Right.
busy. We might have some extra cash that we can spend on it rather than, grinding on some of this work ourselves, like editing and
Sure. Well, let's start at the very basics. Like choosing what your audience is going to be. So I have people reach out to me. They want to start a podcast, and I say, okay, well, what's the topic going to be? Okay, well, it's going to be this. Who's your audience, right? Like you got to know your audience to know what guests you're going to bring on, what topics you're going to cover, all that stuff. And so you really, and that's what they emphasize at Podcast Movement is like, you got to know your audience. And so I think that's like step number one. Like, okay, I'm a physician. I'm going to do a podcast. Am I going to gear it towards patients? Am I going to gear it towards docs? Am I going to gear it towards, device industry or something like that? Pharma. Like I just want to talk, or scientists or engineers. Like just know and tailor that. You can't do both at the same time. I think that's too hard. I think that physicians are going to zone out if something is too basic, and patients are going to zone out if it's too technical. That's advice number one. And then number two is you can bootstrap. You can take you can keep the basics going for pretty long. And that's what we did for a good 2 years. I mean, we had, let me show you a microphone that we used. This is what we send to every guest now. It's a 5-fine USB microphone. Sorry, I don't have it open, but it's $32 on Amazon, right? And what we realize is to get to the next step in terms of audio quality is we need to somewhat control, especially when we're doing remote recording. We need to somewhat control the guest environment, because you have a guest on, they're trying to call in on their phone, and you've been through this, Brad, or they're on their laptop, which is like 10 year old and the audio is horrible and they sound like they're in a, like a cave. Nobody wants to listen to that anymore. Those days are gone. Like that's just not palatable. That you have to have decent audio quality to get people to listen. And so that's step number two, is putting at least some money and effort into your audio quality. And so what goes along with that? Okay, some platform to record. We're using Zoom right now, right? We used Uber Conference for a while. We used Zoom for a while. Now we use Riverside. The only thing that's different between Zoom and Riverside is Zoom is currently recording to the cloud, right? Or it might be recording to your hard drive.
Yeah,
Riverside, Riverside. Let's say I had bad Wi-Fi. Are you familiar with Riverside? Other than, I think maybe when we recorded with you,
I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's kind of like Squadcast.
It records, doesn't it? Each side records to their own computer and then they email it to you.
No, well, it actually now it goes at the end of the session when you hit stop record. It actually will go to the cloud. So it stores locally within your browser, and then at the end of the recording, then it uploads to the Riverside, and then it's like it's all cloud based, which is
So
very
then you don't need
nice.
the guest to be able to send it to you.
Yes,
Yeah.
the guests don't have
Okay.
to need to. They don't have to send it to you, and you don't have to like. So if I have Wi-Fi glitchiness, it doesn't matter. Like you're not gonna. It's the audio is not gonna. The recording's not gonna pick that up because it's being recorded to my computer, and so that's the kind of nice. That's one advantage of it.
Do you have trouble with
So
the guests like knowing how to use it? Like, is it
no,
user friendly enough?
It's just as user friendly as Zoom.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so there's that. And then let's see, there's so recording software and then there's editing software, right? So for a long time we used GarageBand. You can use Audacity, they're free. What did you use, Brad, when you were doing it?
I have never edited a single episode ever,
Yeah.
and I never will.
That's smart of you because it's super it can be very frustrating. It can be challenging to learn and stuff. GarageBand's pretty easy to learn. It comes with every Mac and it's free. And there's YouTube videos to learn it, but something that we discovered about a year ago, almost 2 years ago, is something called Dscript. And it's not very expensive. It's about $30 per user. And what's cool about Dscript is it's also cloud-based and browser-based. And when you throw your MP3 file into it, it auto transcribes everything. So you need to clean it up a little bit, but there's your transcript right there. You can throw that on your website. You can create your show notes out of it. You can even edit video on it. And Dscript's been shown to be like a huge time saver. It's got a lot of plugins. It's got something called Studio Sound. So if your guest had bad audio, your audio sounds great. My audio is probably pretty good. But if a guest had a lot of echo, or if it's got this plugin where it basically cuts out a lot of the echo, and it's just a click of a button. It's pretty amazing. So it's a big time saver. So yeah, those are kind of the main things. And then when it comes to building a team out, I started the same way you did with just finding somebody who's capable of doing these things and outsourcing it. And so I found people on Upwork that were audio engineers. And so I went to Upwork. By the way, any physicians out there looking for anything, like if you want a website built, if you want marketing, if you want, graphic design, any of those things, an app built, go to Upwork. It's just like independent contractors that can help with all that sort of thing. Even building if you need a logo, like somebody can create a logo for you. But we found audio engineers. I think we found all three of our engineers on Upwork originally. One of them, after about a year, came on full time, and then the other two still work for us part time. So, it all started as just outsourcing. Yeah.
Whoa. Hold on there. That was a big leap, because you're going from like, yeah, they're going to edit an episode a week or something, to they came on full time, right? Like,
Yeah.
could you talk about how you made that transition?
Yeah, for sure. So when we first started with, like, I'm just going to call it, shout out to Kieran, our full-time guy. I think we were only one show at that time. We had the vascular interventional show, the IR show. And he started with us that summer. And then Gopi and Ashley are like, hey, we want to do an ENT show. And I said, perfect. I got an engineer. Like, things are starting to kind of come, get in motion where we can take what we've done with the flagship show and apply it to a new specialty. And let's try it. And so we started the ENT show. That was September of 2021. No, 2020. Wow. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So fall of 2020. And we started that show. And then, so I realized, okay, we're recording on the weekends, and I was playing producer and editor for all the episodes to that point. And so I was on all the recordings. I was doing all the editing afterwards. And when we went from one show to two shows, I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like it's taking up all the weekends, all downtime and stuff.
And you had little kids at that point, right?
Yeah. I mean, they were 6 and 8 at that time. Now they're 8 and 10. And so, yeah, I joke that, Backtable's my third kid because it's, it's time consuming and I love it. And, I give it a lot of love. But yeah, so we went from one show to two shows. I hired Kieran, and then we found two more part-time guys to help with keeping up with the recordings because not everybody wants to work on the weekends. And so I needed like some redundancy, right? If Kieran wasn't available because he's just an independent contractor, then I need somebody else to fill in. And so that's how we built this team is we just found part-time workers doing, one job here and there. And then, we kind of, by the time we got 6 months in on Backtable ENT, we kind of had a workflow, like a process down. And then we realized how important that is to build out an official workflow and process, because if not, it's just chaos. It's just like, okay, somebody's got to do the schedule, how difficult scheduling can be. And so then we hire an admin to schedule the docs and, run doodle polls and make sure that schedules align, and then, send out the links for people. And then we had to create like templates for, instructions for the guests so they know what to expect. And then, the spring, so about a year ago.
Sorry, is that same? You find that on Upwork as well? Admin, just like, what do you look for? We need someone to help us stay organized.
It's funny because admin I borrowed from work. So like in my practice, COVID hit and my admin was like, her name's Kelly. She didn't have anything to do because it was COVID and the OBL that we worked at had shut down. And so she helped me out initially. And, she knew how to schedule stuff. Like it was like easy for her. And then she ended up getting a new job. And then one of Gopi's admins from UT Southwestern was looking for extra work. And so we ended up hiring her. And she's been with us ever since, Jamila, and she's been amazing. So, it's just like.
So some of it's outsourcing on like Fiverr and Upwork, and some of it is just your network sometimes gives you what you need. But what about med students? So this is something that I've struggled with because I figured I could have a pre-med or a med student help me out, especially with like social media related stuff where I'm not going to be as savvy as they are. And they can, I'll pay them something and then they'll get something for them, to go on their resume,
right?
Something they can write about, something they can talk about, right? Because especially since what we do is physician oriented, right?
Yeah.
Like it's about practicing medicine. It's not about like the hard facts per se, but it is medically related. And so, I mean, your show is, very, in the weeds and in the specialties that you're dealing with. But either way, it would be something that they could talk about on interviews. And I haven't been able to find anyone. I've tried emailing different organizations on Long Island for the universities around here, and I just gave up.
Yeah, we haven't had a lot of luck with job posts, to be honest. It's also come by word of mouth. It's funny because our first med student, his name's Xander, he came to us via a friend of a friend. He was just interested in radiology and interventional radiology, I guess. And he just was like, and he was purely volunteer. And then it wasn't till, and then we found, I'm trying to think of how we found Lauren. Lauren Fang was a pre-med student, and it might've been the same thing. Like Xander knew her in some remote way, and she stumbled upon the website and like, and then Lauren has led to subsequent med students at her med school, working with us. We did find med students on something called Handshake. Let me just look this up and make sure I'm saying it right. I think it's handshake.com. Yeah, here it is. It's called the website is joinhandshake.com.
Join Handshake. Okay.
Yeah, joinhandshake.com. It's the number one way college students get hired. So it's just like a great job board, and you can post stuff on there and find people that are pre-med students, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Oh, that's perfect. See, on a YouTube channel, now they can see us. They can see me typing, and they can see you looking on the internet.
Yeah.
If this were just a podcast, they would just be hearing this.
It's a part-time job board for students across the country, and you can send it out to schools that you have some association with, or that maybe are geographically located close to you. And so we found a couple of stellar SMU pre-med students, the Dang sisters, and they saw our post on that website, and they applied, and they've turned out to be amazing. And then they knew people, and brought them in. And so it's like been a combination of a couple job, lucking out on a couple job forums, but also largely word of mouth. And then once the other thing you can do is social media. So if you notice like a med student engaging with your, Twitter handle or your LinkedIn, is just send them a message and say, hey, saw, thanks for the support. Saw that you really liked, the episode. Would you have any interest in, participating as a part-time intern or something like that? And I think that, you might have luck that way.
I actually threw it out there on Twitter to see if anyone would be like new a pre-med or a med student. And I got one reply from someone who's interested in interventional radiology. So actually I need to send her information to you because it seems a better fit for Backtable.
Well, there's no reason why, though. It's not that time consuming. I guess the other question is, what do you need help with at that for a med student, where a med student would help you?
Well, at this point, I'm really outsourcing most of it. It would be maybe helping me to manage the website.
Yeah.
Then, I don't want to give them scut, but some of this ends up being scut.
Well, it's, here's where it's a learning. It's really kind of like it's definitely a learning tool for them. Is they write our show notes. So they listen to the episode, and they have to think about the take home points, and they have to write that down. Right. So they write the show notes. They will clean up the transcripts. They will write articles based off of the transcripts, which is also a nice. It's a nice offering for your audience in case they don't want to listen to a 60-minute long podcast. They could like read like a 5-minute article that kind of summarizes the podcast.
It's a great idea. They could clean up the transcript and then use that to create a summary that turns into a blog post.
Exactly. That's what we do with them. And then the other thing where they are a big help for me is social media, because we have so many handles at this point. It's like, you got your personal handle plus the Backtable plus Backtable ENT, for each one. And it's like, I can't be on social media that much. And so they really help out a lot with that. Yeah.
Well, any med students listening, well, reach out. Brad at Physician's Guide to Doctoring. I'll find something for you. Help me out. I'll pay you for your time, and then something interesting to talk about.
I tell you what, for medicine, it's a great way to learn, about what's going on in medicine today. And it's going to lead to all kinds of networking and conversations. Just like we're using podcasts to network and meet new people, you can do the same. And it can really, like you said, like it'll help you on your interview trail. If somebody's looking at your CV and they're like, what's this Physician's Guide to Podcasting? That might stick out more than like 20 research articles on your CV.
Yeah, it depends. It depends on the attending, right? Because some of them might be like, oh, podcast with this Joe Rogan garbage. Or like, I don't even know what a podcast is. Or it'll be someone like, oh, that's so cool. Let me, tell me more. So it might be the thing that really sets you apart. Yeah, because that's the hard thing about reviewing applications. A lot of people tend to blend into each other, right? Our applications tend to look alike.
Completely. Yeah, especially in ENT and IR. It's like a bunch of uber nerds.
Yeah. I did research. I aced all my rotations. So, the name Backtable, came from the fact that in IR, you have everything on your back table, right?
Yeah.
In ENT, we might have a back table for like a septoplasty where we're injecting some lidocaine with epinephrine. So we sometimes have back tables. What's going to happen when you have specialties? Then when you have back table shows that don't have back tables, what are you going to do?
That's a great question, Brad. And has Gopi told you the origin of the name?
I assumed it was because of your app, right? It was like stuff we want to have on our back table.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's Gopi that came up with the name of it because we couldn't figure out a name for the app. Like we had the hardest time. We had like the worst. I don't even remember what they were, but we were really bad names. And it's, as you know, it's hard. I mean, it's hard to choose a name for a company or anything. I mean, even your kids and your pets, it's hard to choose a name that's going to be around for a while. And Gopi, we were just kind of, I don't know, playing with stuff. I was running things by her one night and she was like, it'd be a cool name for your app. She goes, Backtable, because we put all of our devices and our instruments on the Backtable, and it applies to all procedural specialties. And I was like, yeah, you're right. And we kind of thought about it for a week or so, and then as we thought about it, it just made more and more sense, and it was just like such a perfect fit for what we were trying to do. And so yeah, I give complete total credit to Gopi for coming up with the name. And to answer your question, we've thought about, it's like sort of like what's going to be our next show? What other specialties do we want to cover? Do we want to cover, ophthalmology? Do we want to cover, GI? Do we want to cover colorectal surgery? Like, and a lot of it comes with, we have to have, talented, committed hosts who want to podcast, right? Like that's the linchpin right there. But what if it came up the other day, like, what if we had a host for Backtable ID, infectious disease? Does that really apply? And I was like, I don't know, because I envision Backtable being very procedure specialty specific. And it's not going to be like curbside. You probably have heard of curbsiders, right? They're dominating the internal medicine podcast space. Like they've done a great job. They've been around for a while. They produce a great podcast. I don't know of any other like big I mean, you got Peter Attia with the Drive. I mean, his kind of covers docs and patients, but I don't know, other than stuff that's like more geared towards the patients, I don't know of a lot of like dedicated specialty specific podcasts. Do you?
I mean, there are some that are out there. I mean, there are ENT. I think there's Head Mirror.
Also. Yeah. Oh yeah. There's Head Mirror. Yeah.
But I mean, I don't go looking for other specialties, so I just know the other one that's ENT. Then I think there might be some specialty societies that have their own podcasts, right?
Right.
But that stuff is, I think, usually covering like the journal articles that have been written.
Those are way more academic, right?
Yeah.
Those are more, covering journal articles, getting in, deep dive into the data, stuff like that. But it's more formal.
And less applicable to your practice. Like you're covering is stuff that's going to influence the way you practice. Like if it's not going to influence the way you practice, you're probably not going to have it on. And those journals, right? Like if there's 30 articles in a journal, maybe 2 of them, if you might influence the way you practice a little bit, but nothing's going to be really world shaking. Whereas, podcaster.
I mean, I want to talk about that a little bit. Like, let's think about how people learn nowadays, right? I mean, it's hard to sit down and read a textbook. It's hard to sit down and even read your journal. I don't
have that stamina anymore. Yeah.
No, you don't have time. You don't have the bandwidth, right? You got, how many kids do you have, Brad?
3.
3.
Yeah.
And they're all little.
So I learn I listen to podcasts.
Exactly.
That's how I stay up to date. So I do listen to my Academy's podcast. I do listen to Backtable ENT, and that helps me stay on top of
Yeah. What's
what I
going
need to
on?
know. I mean, on top
Right.
of all the CME stuff that I have to do, but
Yeah.
like but it's, my commute is like 25 minutes in each direction. So that's
So it's
50
perfect
minutes a
timing.
day where I'm able
Yeah.
to consume information that's going to help me be a better physician. 50 minutes a day. That's a lot of time if
It's a
I'm not
lot of
talking to my
time.
mom.
Yeah. And like, I was thinking about this the other day because I'm trying to learn French, and like, I can't sit down and read a French, like a textbook anymore. I don't even have space to do it in my house. What am I going to do? Go to a coffee shop? And it's like, okay, if I need a podcast
Why are
that
you
teaches
trying to
me
learn
French,
French?
because we're going to spend a year abroad in France. Yeah. Just to let everybody know, like, big news.
Wow.
But
That's
yeah,
bold.
I know. But that another topic we can talk about offline, but I need audio learning. Like I crave audio learning at this point. It's just, I love Audible. I love what they've done. I love that I can consume a book by both reading it in bed and also on the go. Like I can flip back and forth. It's so
Pimsleur
convenient.
has some audio CDs that I got. So my wife is Swiss, and there's an interesting thing about the French speaking part of Switzerland is this French that they speak is similar, if not identical, to France French, whereas Swiss German is its own dialect. And actually each canton has a different dialect. That is, they can understand each other, but the
Yeah.
Germans and the Austrians do not understand the Swiss. So my wife speaks a language that's it's not even written. In school, they learn it's called High German. They don't learn Swiss German. They speak Swiss German at home, and it's similar to, like, if you've ever heard two people from Jamaica speaking to each other, and
Okay.
their dialect is, they're speaking English, but their intonation and maybe even some of the words that they use um, can make it hard for you to understand what they're saying. Well,
Yeah.
Swiss German is like that, only it's even more different, so that it's but it's not a written language. So how am I going to learn this language that nobody writes and nobody reads, but
Yeah.
she's speaking it to my kids, and my kids now understand Swiss German, so they're going to be able to speak to each other. So, but
Well,
I got a couple of CDs, and I would listen to them in the car the same way that you're, probably consuming French. Didn't
yeah.
help though. I still don't understand it.
I mean, Duolingo's great. It's a nice way to like kind of get the basics, but you need that you need to be able to have conversation, and that part of it. So I think structured learning for me might be the way to go with a language. But when we're physicians and we're out in practice, we got to get like the quick. We got to just be able to, like you said, have that 25 to 50 minutes a day where we get up to speed on something quickly. And also it's a great kind of, it's kind of like Netflix shows. It's like, hey, did you hear, I heard about this on the Backtable podcast. Like, it's a way, it's a discussion piece as well, especially in this format where somebody tells a great story or piece of historical IR or something like that. I'd love Gopi and Ashley to get some historians on to talk about maybe history of ENT. Have you had anything like that?
No, no, nothing about the history of medicine. Although that would be interesting. My stuff tends to be like some concrete point that you're trying to learn. This
Yeah.
has turned into something different. I mean, we're it was more like how to build a team.
Yeah.
And
Well, we can talk about that more.
the
We can talk
summary of
about that
that,
more.
the summary of that is, we're running short on time, but
Yeah.
the summary of that, for building team was, outsource, Upwork, Fiverr, something like that, and then
Yeah.
reach out to your own network.
Yeah.
And then we're going to find out it's not handshake.com, it's something else. But so that was supposed to be the big takeaway from this episode, but it turned into more, just the two of us telling stories and
Just
chatting
riffing.
back and forth.
Yeah. I apologize for hijacking the conversation that way, but I
No,
think
it was
that
great. It was great. But we do. It's been, close to an hour. So we got to wrap up now.
Yeah.
So tell us where people can find Backtable.
Yeah, backtable.com is the main place, is where our whole library is. Again, we have the flagship VI. So just real quick, it's still an IR heavy show, but because we have vascular surgeons on, we have interventional cardiologists on, we call it the vascular and interventional show, or Backtable VI. And that's because we want that show to be collaborative, include everyone in the endovascular space doing endovascular procedures, whether it be PAD, dialysis work, neurovascular work. So that's why it's called Backtable VI. Then we have Backtable ENT, we have Backtable Urology, and Innovation. Innovation show is having physician founders on, primarily, starting device companies or just innovative companies in the healthcare space. Just kind of those types of innovators, different breed of people. Just really super crazy smart people that are just disruptive in the way they think. And I like interviewing them and picking their brains. And Brian Hartley and Eric Gantwerker, they're the primary hosts on that show, but I'll do an episode here and there when it's somebody that I know or who I really want to get to know. And then we're on iTunes, we're on Spotify, Google, we're basically on everything. Even Ghana. Are you on Ghana yet, Brad?
No, I'm not familiar with it.
Ghana is like the Indian version of Spotify. And so try and get on that, because there's, as you know, there's a ton of physicians in India, and so they'd probably be interested in your podcast as well. And so anybody getting started, one more thing is there's a lot of great like all-in-one platforms out there that will help you with a lot of this stuff. Spotify has a couple companies underneath that they've purchased. Anchor is one of them. I've heard really great things about Anchor. We use Anchor's big brother, which is Megaphone. And that's just because we have multiple shows and we can kind of organize them and maintain them all in one platform. But if you're starting out your show, I highly suggest Anchor. And then there's some other ones like Burberry and Lisbon. What do you use?
I think Podbean might be one of those.
Podbean.
Yeah. I'm on Libsyn.
Libsyn. Yeah. Libsyn's
Libsyn, which is, I think, the most popular. It was at one point the most popular media host.
That, and it's one of the oldest, so it's been around for a while, and so it has a lot of the kinks worked out, I think. So yeah, I mean, I think we gave a lot of great advice on how to start a podcast or how to scale up, how to build a team. I'm trying to think of any. So we covered admin, we covered engineers, we covered med students. I would say marketing is the other piece that you really need help with. The med students can help with marketing, but if you want to build out a website, like you should probably, unless you're savvy and you can do it on your own. I just lucked out in that the guy that was building my website for my clinical practice really liked what we were doing with Backtable and decided to come on full time with Backtable. And his name is Brian Schmitz, and he runs he's like our lead of digital marketing, and he puts our whole website together and everything like that.
I think I may have misunderstood when you said full time. You mean like you're their sole employer?
I'm their primary employer. Now, what side gigs he has, I'm sure he has some, but like he's a full time dedicated to Backtable. Yeah. In terms of numbers, yeah.
There's enough work for that.
There is plenty of work. Yeah. I mean, Now we've outgrown Wix. So we started using Wix.com. Which is a great for starting, a website out, but we've built so many pages on it that we're starting to have issues. And so really what we realized is we've outgrown it. So we now have to migrate to a new, something else. I don't know. We'll figure it out.
That's for the website guys to figure out, defer to their expertise.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I heard you have these little setbacks and stuff like that, and it can get really frustrating. And you can have it, where a podcast doesn't turn out so well, or a guest is like unimpressive. You might experience this with this recording, Brad. But my advice is like, just to kind of keep pushing on, because the people who I think really succeed in this space are just they persist and they keep moving and they keep going. And you're going to have ups and downs. You're going to have frustrations, But somebody, an entrepreneur said, I think part of being a startup or success in a startup is moving from one setback to another with enthusiasm. And I think that's true. You just have to keep pushing and know that that experience is part of it. And that's going to be part of your success. So, good luck to everybody.
Yeah. Seth Godin refers to that as the dip. He's got a whole book called The Dip, where, it'll be all exciting at the beginning and then your numbers won't be that great, referring to podcasts specifically, but he refers in general to any entrepreneur or any endeavor for that matter. And you just feel like you're slogging through. And at some point you get out of the dip and it's unclear when it's going to be or how it's going to happen. But if you just keep at it, you'll emerge out of the dip and then you'll take off. So
I mean, that's if you think like any origin story or success story, everybody's got a dip, right? Everybody goes through hard times. It's just, you got to live through that. And I think a lot of people give up too early. So yeah, I agree with you.
Aaron Fritts, Backtable ENT, Backtable Urology, and Backtable Innovation. And I look forward to the next Backtable. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Brad. Appreciate you having me on.
That was Dr. Bradley Block at the Physician's Guide to Doctoring. He can be found at physiciansguidetodoctoring.com or wherever you get your podcasts. If you have a question for a previous guest or have an idea for a future episode, send a comment on the webpage. Also, please be sure to leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform. We'll see you next time on the Physician's Guide to Doctoring.